Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm Liam, a Cambridge graduate and current London law student. And in this video, I'm going to be telling you how to take what you read and study in these things and put it in here as efficiently as possible using spaced repetition. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll struggle to remember what you had for lunch today, never mind anything else. And so you'll definitely know that feeling of walking out of a lesson being like, yeah, I understood that, reading something. It's in here, I've got it, I understood it, it's all good. Then you go to do your homework or an essay or an assignment, or maybe even to study for an exam, and you're like, no, don't think I've ever looked at this before. It feels like even though you study for just as long as other people, or maybe even longer than other people, you just don't seem to retain the information in the same way. Well, that can be explained by science, and particularly by the science of the way connections are formed within the brain. Now, not all connections are created equal, some are stronger than others. And in this video, we're basically going to show you how you can form the strongest, longest lasting connections to make sure that you learn as efficiently as possible and that stuff stays in your brain. First of all, I'm going to start off by outlining what spaced repetition is and the general principle as to why it is the most powerful study technique alongside active recall. We'll then move on to the mistake that you're almost certainly making and that I continue to make and that I'm continuing to fight against, that makes you study much less effectively than some other people. We'll then move on to easy to implement techniques that I have implemented highly effectively in my own studies to make sure that I'm using the power of spaced repetition in my day-to-day studies. And finally, I will cover my miracle study plan that in the run-up to exams will make sure you make the most of the time spent studying and that time converts into exam results. Oh, and I should probably add that in this part of the video, I disagree quite strongly with what Ali Abdaal says in his much viewed video on spaced repetition, so stay tuned for that. So let's do this. Somewhat obviously, over time, the brain just forgets information. Now, this is where what is called the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting comes in, and you might have heard of this before. It's basically just the idea that over time, information vanishes from the brain, or at least those connections become so weak that we can't recall it, and we forget things. Now, the idea behind active recall alongside spaced repetition is that as we recall those pieces of information that we're just on the brink of forgetting, we then build a really much stronger connection in the place of what was a slightly weaker connection from the very first time we recalled that information. And over time, as the name suggests, we can space out our repetitions of recalling that information to build really, really strong connections that actually endure for a very long period of time. If you can catch a piece of information just as it's getting to the edge of where you can recall it, that's where you'll build a really strong connection. But simply, the harder your brain has to work to recall a piece of information, the stronger that piece of information will be encoded into your brain. To start with, you're going to have to work fairly hard to recall a piece of information that you took into your brain just a few seconds ago, maybe a few minutes ago, then maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, then a couple of hours, a day, couple of days, week, month, year. You see how over time those periods get further and further apart. And that really is the power of spaced repetition. So what is the mistake you're making? Well, most of us will generally go to a class on topic one. Then we'll do the homework assignment for topic one, straight after the class. Or we might go away, do some reading for topic one, make some notes about topic one, and then do the homework for topic one. Then we move on and we go to a class on topic two. You see, the problem here is that your brain isn't having to work hard enough to recall the piece of information. So you're doing topic one piece of information, then you're doing topic one piece of information again. Your brain hasn't forgotten anything from when you did it the first time. Then you're doing topic one piece of information again a third time if you do a homework assignment or an essay. Your brain is never having to fight to recall those pieces of information that you're covering at each of those steps. However, if you study in a circular manner, and by that I mean you go to class for topic one, you then maybe do the reading for topic one, then you leave it. And then you do the reading for topic two, go to class on topic two, do the homework for topic one, go to the class for topic three, do the homework for topic two, do the reading for topic three, etc. Then actually you're leaving little gaps between each of those repetitions. Each of those repetitions is spaced. And even though you spend exactly the same amount of time on your studying, you'll find that the results are massively improved on the first way of studying, which is the way that pretty much everyone studies. Like, it's just normal to do a bit of studying on topic one and then to do the homework on topic one. But it is wrong. The fundamental problem with this mode of studying is that the first encounters are very close together, and so the information is fairly poorly encoded into your memory, and there is then a massive time gap between the first encounters and when you then go to recall the information when you're studying for your exams. So ideally what you want is you want first encounter, class, couple of days later, reading, couple of days later, assignment, Then, between then and your final exams, maybe one more encounter when you do some revision or a mock exam, then your final exam. And you'll find that you can spend exactly the same amount of time doing it in that way, more progressively, than you would have to if you do first 3 encounters, big gap, then you've forgotten almost everything on that forgetting curve, and you then have to build that all back up cramming. This is about using time effectively rather than spending more time studying. And that's where Liam's law of circular study comes in. You need to build circles, little circles throughout your study sessions, within them and between them, so that rather than studying 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, you're studying 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You've got those little time gaps between each time you encounter a piece of information so that you're really harnessing the power of spaced repetition. There was a really interesting study conducted in 2011, and I did steal this from Ali Abdaal, so credits to him. Basically, the study looked at people retaining words in Swahili in their English translation. So for example, hamjambo is hello in Swahili. My pronunciation's probably terrible, but whatever. And it looked at how well people retained a list of 100 Swahili words. The people who looked at the list once and studied them once retained just 1% of the words. The people who looked at the list once and then recalled those words using active recall after a few days recalled 25%. Another group that did something similar but recalled the words over and over again, so for example said hamjambo hello, hamjambo hello, hamjambo hello, but they only did it once. That made almost no difference from the group that just said hamjambo hello. However, the group that looked at them once, then said hamjambo hello, recalled actively after a few days, and then did that again, that group that used spaced repetition over the course of 3 different intervals retained up to 75% of the words. So that's a huge increase, and basically that goes to show that you could spend just as long on, like the group who went hamjambo hello, hamjambo hello, hamjambo hello, recalling words over and over again until you've perfected them and then forget them. Or you could spend that same amount of time doing that over 3 different occasions and retain 200% more information than if you studied them once but for a prolonged period. And that should pretty much tell us everything we need to know about cramming. It can be highly effective if you have masses of time to spend and are willing to spend loads of time doing it. But if you're looking for the most efficient study method, that actually means you have to spend less time than if you cram. Spaced repetition is the answer. Now let's have a look at how you can apply spaced repetition to your own life and your own studies. The first technique is to delay your review until the end of your study session. So most people when they're studying something will skim read maybe, but usually just read something through for the first time, try and understand it simultaneously, try and make notes simultaneously, and then maybe once they've read like a paragraph or a section of information about something, they'll quickly go over it and then move on. And then they'll repeat that process over and over again. What I'm proposing is again that we build circles within our study session. So I'd recommend that if you're reading material, for example, the first thing you do is that you skim read through the whole of the material. That means reading titles, reading the first sentences, getting the general gist of what everything is about and an order to that. Then once you've done that, you want to go through and read the notes, and also if you're watching a lecture, for example, watch the whole lecture through and make notes on it as you do so. But I don't want you to stick on any point for ages and rewatch a particular point and rewatch a particular point or re-go over a particular paragraph over and over again at the start. It's only once you've then been through all of it once, we then cycle again and we go over in particular detail anything we found particularly difficult. And then cycle 4, we come through and we review the whole thing. Usually in my head I'll do this. I'll just kind of say, right, okay, this topic, for example in chemistry I just covered states of matter. Let's go through states of matter. Let's talk to myself through what the properties of a solid, liquid, gas are. Already in one study session we've built in 4 cycles when normally most people would only have 1. The next technique to mention is the end of the day recall. Now most of us when we get to the end of the day studying, like we finish our last assignment, close the book and get out of the library or get out of the room as quickly as we possibly can. It seems logical that like as soon as you finish you want to just escape, get away from it. But the reality is that actually if you spent an extra 5 to 10 minutes just going over everything you'd studied that day, you would then save yourself much more time in the long run. So how can you do that practically One, you can just talk to yourself, explain to yourself, for example, like let's say, go back to the chemistry example, states of matter. I've covered solids, liquids and gases, and I might just run through the key words. For example, solid, vibrate about a fixed point, liquids, slip and slide particles over one another, gases, high energized particles that move freely around a space. Something like that, you know, those key buzzwords, that's it, move on. Or I might choose to use one of the active recall techniques that for me has been like a game changer, and I know loads of you love it from my active recall video. Check that out if you haven't already. It's called the brain splurge, and basically that means going through a topic and just writing down everything about that you can remember from the day. So that would be big titles, and for example, like I do this for law quite a bit, I'll just jot down all of the main cases at the end of the day that I've covered, and I just find that really helps with memorizing cases, because otherwise I find that the cases really just don't go in my head at all from just reading and making notes. The other thing I particularly recommend with the brain splurge is that if you get something wrong, or there's a piece of information that you're like, I know there's something here, but I just can't quite remember it, quickly look at your notes, just highlight it in the brain splurge that you've done, write it in red, and then just kind of take a particular like mental image of that. And hopefully that piece of information will now stick in your brain that much kind of more firmly than it otherwise would if you'd just kind of been like, I can't quite remember that, meh, move on, let's leave. Next up, we have to do homework questions in your head from memory. What? I did this for law this year and it was really, really productive. Every single problem question, like every single bit of the question, I would go through that question in my head, trying to think of the cases I would use. Like, I'm not writing a full answer to that question in my head. I'm not saying that. I would go through the question and be like, right, I know I need that case. What was that case that I need? Okay, that's a piece of information that like I really need to make sure I try and memorize that when I go through this properly. Yeah, I get that. I know the process. Ooh, I can't remember what I do here. This bit of this question I'm going to struggle with. I can tell that already. I need to make sure I do that particularly like carefully. What you're doing there is that you're telling your brain, right, these things I'm happy with, bam, bam, bam. These bits, however, I'm much less happy with. I need to make sure I go over those, make sure they're fully locked into my memory so that next time I do a question like this, everything comes to me like that. But yeah, do the homework properly, but first of all, make sure you try and do it in your head and find out the areas that you know you're going to find difficult and pay particular attention to those. My final tip is really kind of linked to the previous tip. It's to not do homework or assignments too far in advance of the class when you're going to be going through that homework or assignment. And that piece of work should be done pretty much in the middle between first viewing, like whether that's first class, lecture, or just going over notes, and then when you actually go through that essay or piece of work in some kind of tutorial. The crucial thing here is that I know so many people who are like, I'm going to be super productive this year, I'm going to smash my homework, I'm going to do it the first day I get it, and it's going to be done a week ahead of time. The problem with that, and like I had this in law class throughout this year, those people would then turn up to the class where we'd be going through that assignment and they wouldn't even be able to remember what happened in the problem question. And so they would sit there throughout like a whole class having no idea what was going on. And I, who had done it like maybe 1 or 2 days, sometimes on the day, not ideal, but it happens. And I actually think that doing it on the very morning of the class, like fairly rushed, was more productive than having done it really well a week earlier. Be prepared and do things in advance, ideally like in the middle between first class and going through the assignment, but really don't do it too far ahead of the date when you're going to be going through it, because otherwise you'll have forgotten it all and you just won't engage fully in the class and you won't get the full benefit of that class. And now I'm going to take you through my miracle study plan, which is the very study plan that I use to study for my Cambridge finals and also for my recent law exams. It removes any sense of a really long-term revision plan that's very fixed over, like, say, a month or 2 months. I don't agree with that. It's impossible to know at the start of planning your revision, let's say 2 months ahead of your exams, like, how long is it going to take me to study EU law? Well, until I start studying it and realise how little I know or how much I know, it's impossible for me to really plan. Like, I could need 3 hours, I could need 10 hours. Like, I really have no idea. It just depends how much I retain. And so having like a really structured, rigid, long-term plan, I just completely disagree with. So similarly to Ali, first up, we are going to create a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet, we're basically going to list down column A all of the topics that we have to cover for our exams. So if you only do one subject, that's just going to be all of the topics for that subject. If you do multiple subjects, for example, for GCSE, you have a choice. You can either do subject 1 down the page, subject 2, subject 3, all down the sheet on one page, or you can create multiple sheets and have one for each subject. I think it's best to have one sheet because I like being able to see where I'm at with all of the different subjects at one time on one sheet. It allows me to say, actually, you know what? I'm doing a lot of maths. Like, I'm happy with that. I maybe should dedicate more time to history. Once you've listed all of the topics down column A that you're going to have to cover, I then recommend ordering those by the order of your exams. So you want to have the first exam in the subject at the top and the last exam at the bottom. I then also recommend that you, at this stage, have one initial color, either green, yellow, or red, in each of those boxes, which is just your opinion on like how confident in this subject am I. That may prove to be completely wrong in your first study session, but I think it's helpful at the outset to have some idea like, do I think I'm good at this or not? And how the system works is basically every time you study that topic, you want to put the date that you study it and a color, again, green, yellow, red, as to how easy or difficult you found that topic. And remember to use active recall, so ask yourself questions, test yourself throughout, maybe use Anki, flashcard app to test yourself, Quizlet, something like that, to make sure that you're actively trying to recall the information. Easier, green, you're gonna have a longer gap until you study it again. Red, not so great, you're going to look at it again in the next couple of days to make sure that you're really familiar with it. However, this is where I'm going to disagree with Ali Abdaal in his video on spaced repetition. Basically, I feel that his approach, which is broadly like just take any of the topics that you've got down the list somewhat randomly, I mean mainly focusing on the ones you find hard, but obviously you have to do a bit of everything, so just sort of randomly pick topics. I think he calls it specifically a scattergun approach. I think it's actually very unproductive to jump around too quickly between different subjects. Here's why. If you start off studying constitutional administrative law, let's say, for example, and I'm talking about the nature of the English constitution and British constitution and why we have an unwritten constitution, and these are fairly complex ideas and I'm trying to link them together with one another, but I'm going to do that for half an hour and then move on. And then tomorrow I'm going to spend another half an hour on it. By the time I've even like got to grips again and got my bearings with where I was yesterday, I'm half an hour into my study session. I think it's really important that early on in your revision process, you give yourself the time and the freedom to have, say, half a day, if that's what's required to really get into the complex arguments and to really think about how you're going to frame your arguments within the exam, rather than just quickly kind of snapping between different subjects in the way that might work really well, certainly later in the revision process, or for subjects that are just naturally, like contract law, for example, just less nitty-gritty and complex in their different moving parts that you've got to try and link together in essay plans and notes when you're preparing for the exams. The second reason I disagree with Ali is that I don't think we should just randomly be picking topics from our spreadsheet. Instead, I think we should be using what I like to call topic bursts. I'd recommend doing topics in bursts of 3, and that means that pretty close together you do a topic 3 times, and then you have a break of about a week, and then you repeat that process until the exams arrive. So for example, I might on day 1 cover topic 1, 2, 3, and then 1 again in the evening. I get the benefits already of creating a cycle where I'm going over topic 1 again at the end of the day. Then day 2, I might do something like 4, 5, 2, 3. Now I'm doing 4 and 5 for the first time, probably in a little bit more detail, and then probably half as much time as on those on topics 2 and 3, going over them at the end of the day. Then day 3, I might, for example, start off the day with topic 1, a quick session, maybe an hour, something like that, unless it's a hard topic, in which case I might choose to dedicate a decent chunk of time to it. Then I'd probably do the first session on topics 6 and 7, again, a third of the day, something like that on those, and then finish off with a review of topic 4. On day 4, I might do topics 8, 7, 3, and 4, So again, one new topic that day, and then for example, topics 1, 5, because 1 was particularly hard, say, and 8 on day 5. And I should say that now I've gone over topic 1 4 times, and a few of the other topics 3 times, I'm probably going to give those a break until I get to the end of this kind of study burst. This is burst number 1, by the way, until I've covered all of the different topics, and then I'll loop back and start again. So basically what this is doing is building the connections really strongly, just getting them to break over a week to 10 days, bam, we come back with burst 2 and go again. So then by the time we get to burst 2, we're probably doing 4 or 5 topics a day. By the time we get onto burst 3, having gone through all the topics again, we're maybe doing 5 or 6 a day. And aside from the benefits to the connections you're forming, the other reason that I advocate doing these sort of 3 or 4 session bursts of each topic is I think that if you have sort of 3 or 4 days of covering a topic, either most of those days or every single one of those days, that gives you the time to be able to really develop your ideas properly if you're in one of those topics that's complex and requires you to really think. If, however, you do the scattergun approach and it could be 5 or 6 days between your first coverage of that topic and the next time you cover it, the chances are you're going to have forgotten all of the kind of idea progressions that you developed and you're going to be back pretty much to square one. But Liam, isn't 7 to 10 days way too long to have a gap between studying sort of my first burst and my second burst of a subject? Well, what I'd recommend is using what I like to call 30-minute reviews. Now, 30-minute reviews I use whenever a topic is shaded on my spreadsheet in orange or red, even after those 3 or 4 first sessions. And I'll basically use this to really reinforce any information that I'm not 100% on, that I'm not feeling really confident on. So for example, on day 6, I might do topic 9, I might then have a 30-minute review session on topic 4, I might then do topic 10 properly for 2 or 3 hours, again broken up, and then I might have a quick 30-minute review of topic 5, for example. So to quickly finish this video, I want to make one final point, which is that even if you consider yourself to be a crammer, even if you think like, yeah, I don't want to learn this over the long term, I don't want to keep this in my mind for a long time, I just want to get through these exams and move on and forget it the next day, I don't care. Even if you think that spaced repetition still has a crucial role to play in your revision, because of the importance of building those cycles, those circles, into the way you're studying. Make sure you're building those cycles into every single part of your studying, from the very first moment you read content through to when you're preparing for exams. So start getting used to reviewing what you've studied at the end of each study session, just going quickly mentally explaining to yourself exactly kind of, I remember this, just for 2 minutes at the end of a study session, just to get that first repetition in. Then again, at the end of the day, maybe use the brain splurge to cover everything you've gone over in that day quickly, titles, keywords, bullet points, target any areas that you're really struggling to remember. Then, as far as homework is concerned, try and make sure that you're doing your homework right in the middle of the first time you cover the content and the review session, the tutorial, class, seminar, when you're going to go through that homework. And remember, try to do the homework, if you can, in your head. Then our miracle study plan, remember to use the spreadsheet, color code the spreadsheet and add in those dates every time you use it. I mean, feel free not to use this if this is completely like gobbledygook to you and you think it's going to be useless, but it works for me and it works similarly for Ali, although mine is better. And remember that rather than just scattergunning through the spreadsheet, use topic bursts, study 3 or 4 times each topic before then having a week or 10 days break, cover all of the topics and repeat for burst 2, repeat for burst 3, and then once you get towards your exams, like the days before your exams, you can focus on the topics just the days before the exams happen. That's pretty much all there is to it. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do share it, please do like, please do comment. I'm Liam, and hit that subscribe button. It's been a pleasure.